Coming to you live from Happy Hacker BBS Studio 1, this is the Ashtabula County Insider. Here is your host, David Bucci.
Hello everyone, this is David Bucci, and I have a special election edition of the Ashtabula County Insider. Today is October 1st, 2011, and in the studio today I am pleased to welcome Michael Franklin, our Ashtabula City Solicitor, and he is here and going to talk about the office of City Solicitor and his re-election bid for the office. So good afternoon, Mike. How are you doing?
Hello, David. I'm well, and I want to thank you for having me.
Great. I want to talk about a whole lot of things related to the solicitor's office and talk about your re-election bid and how it's going to go for the city of Ashtabula, because there are a number of residents who want to know about you, want to know about your platform, that kind of a thing. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Now, for some of the people who don't know enough about you, I'd like to ask you to take a couple of minutes and talk about Mike Franklin, the person, and let's learn a little bit about who you are and what brought you here to Ashtabula in the first place.
I'm an attorney. I've lived and worked in Ashtabula since 1981, which was to say right after I got out of law school. Before law school and college, I grew up in Galion, Ohio, central part of the state, and I was born just down the road from there in Marion, Ohio. My family's working class. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. My father worked in a GM plant down the road. I grew up in a small town that resembled Ashtabula in many, many respects, except for the lovely lake that we enjoy that Galion, of course, does not possess.
So you came here in 1981, you just said?
Yes, I did. That was my first job out of law school. I was 1981 resembled 2011 in many respects. There weren't a lot of jobs. One job was with a company, a law firm here called Diamond and Dubsky. They interviewed me. They hired me right out of law school. I was happy to have a job, but I was really happy to move to a community of a size that I was comfortable with on Lake Erie, which I remembered from childhood vacations. I've always loved boating and sailing, and it just seemed the best of many worlds to move here. And 30 years later, here I am.
And here you are, and in that time that you've been here, you managed to find your way into running for the office of Ashtabula City Solicitor. What got you down that path that you wanted to run for a public office?
I had run a couple of years before that for the school board because I had become very interested in what was going on in our school system. In our larger community, I guess I would say I had lived here and worked here long enough that I had a pretty good feel for the trouble we were facing. We aren't keeping our best and brightest kids here. We raise them, we educate them, they go off to college, they don't come back. The resultant drain has obviously hurt the community. Our tax base has eroded, our business base has eroded. And it seemed to me that we were facing on a number of levels a crisis of leadership. And at that point, I perceived the biggest crisis as being on the school board. So I ran and was elected to the school board in 2005. In connection with that job, I became aware that the city of Ashtabula was also facing a crisis of leadership. And I became personally convinced that there were some things going on in the solicitor's office, that is to say the legal counsel for the city of Ashtabula, that needed correction. Some things that I felt could and should be done better. Ultimately, I became convinced that I could do them better. So I decided to go ahead and make a run for office. And enough people agreed that it was time for a change that I was fortunately elected just not quite 4 years ago.
So in that time, 4 years ago, that was your first time that you ran for city solicitor, and you were successful. You are running for re-election. You want the office again. So the 4 years that you've been there hasn't turned you away, hasn't soured you on the office, obviously. Can you talk about some of your accomplishments that you have done while you've held the office in this 4-year period?
We've made a number of changes. We've worked very closely with the municipal court to reduce what was a dreadful backlog of criminal cases. There were good and bad reasons for that. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to pin all that on any one person or any one decision. But I'm pleased to say that we, while filing an average of about 200 more criminal cases, and I'm talking about non-traffic, not traffic tickets. We're talking about anything from disorderly conduct to assault to domestic violence. We're filing on average about 200 more criminal cases per year than were filed the last year my predecessor was in office. And yet we've whittled the backlog of those sorts of cases down from over 800 when I started to a little over 500 at this point. So 200 more cases per year being filed, yet we're resolving cases timely enough that we've reduced the backlog by 300 cases. I'm pleased about that. I'm pleased that we've continued to have a good working relationship with all the law enforcement agencies. I believe they appreciate my open door policy. They can call me, they can come see me. I think they appreciate me being in the office as much as I am. That is a bit of a change from the prior administration. I'm virtually full-time. I'm allowed to have an outside business, and I do have an outside business, but I end up working about 40 to 44 hours a week for the city. So I'm pleased. It's been a hard job. I won't pretend it's not a difficult job, but the challenge is there, the interest is there, the working relationships have been good. So I'm willing to do it for another 4 years.
Obviously, it's well known that the city of Ashtabula has been facing some financial issues. We're ending up with less and less money year after year to go into the city budget that is available to pay for city services and so forth. What kind of things have you been forced to do, and what have you done to contribute to helping with the cash flow problems where we just don't have enough money to pay for everything? Your office has obviously had to take a hit. What kinds of things have you done because of the financial situation?
When I came into office in late 2007, December 1st of 2007 was my first day. It didn't take a genius to see that the financial problems were building actually across the area and across the country. Tax bases eroding, income tax revenues going down. It was obviously going to be a problem. I took a look the first month I was in office at the things that the office was spending money on in that end of the fiscal year 2007 budget. I immediately took the city car that my predecessor had used almost, as far as I know, exclusively for his transportation, and turned that over to the police department because they needed it, and I did not feel it was appropriate for the city of Ashtabula to pay my gas expense, my lubrication expense, my insurance expense, my maintenance expense, to wash my car, which I was using essentially to drive to and from work. I drive my own car just like most of the citizens do. That saved the city a couple of $1,000s a year. I also noted I had a nearly new cell phone on my desk when I walked in, and I asked, what does this cost per month? I was told $250. I said, well, we can do without this. I've got a cell phone that I don't mind paying for, and the citizens don't need to spend $250 a month to give me another cell phone. As time progressed, and as our tax base continued to erode, and especially income tax revenues took a horrible hit, as Ashtabula County Ashtabula County and City rode out the recession with the rest of the state and country, we made further cuts. I've voluntarily reduced my income by, over the 4-year period, I think I've given back to the city something over $15,000. I've very reluctantly had my staff take furlough days. I've clamped down on overtime, and I've clamped down on compensatory time. And unfortunately, this year, things just got to the point where we had to reduce staff, and we laid off one of our secretaries. We're down to 2 attorneys and 1 secretary, and we're making do with that. I would say we responded to that challenge, and I'm so proud of my staff that they responded to that challenge without reducing the level of service that we provide. That and just giving legal guidance to the policymakers of the city, the most especially the city council and the city manager, as they've gone through very similar difficult decision-making processes about where to cut, who could be cut lawfully, how those cuts could take place. That's been my participation in that.
So these are items that you consciously made a decision to do within your office, and these were not necessarily dictated by the budget that city council set aside as far as the policy goes. City council would say, we're cutting your office, but you had to decide how to distribute those cuts.
Right. And actually, I volunteered some of those cuts, but the policy, the budget is set by city council upon recommendation of the city manager. And like any other employee or department head in the city, I have to live with what I am allocated.
You obviously are running for re-election, and you want to retain the seat. Given the roller coaster ride that you have had during the past 4 years, I guess I'll ask the main question: why do you want the seat back?
Because the city needs competent legal representation. It needs professional legal representation. It needs an attorney who does his job not based upon who he likes or doesn't like or what issues he supports or doesn't support, but because he knows the law or he's willing to research the law and he's willing to communicate as effectively as he can with all of his clients. And keep in mind, the city charter picks my clients. I don't pick my clients. And the citizens of the city of Ashtabula pick my clients. But the city, if it's going to move forward, needs that component of city government and city leadership to be done as professionally as possible. I believe I am the candidate that can supply that. I believe I've demonstrated that. I'm willing to move forward with any combination of policymakers in the city to accomplish what they believe the citizens have mandated that they do.
When you ran the first time, we also had Mr. Canigallo, who was running for city manager at the time, and the two of you appeared to be tied together policy-wise, philosophy-wise, however you would like to say it. Where do you stand with Mr. Canigallo at this point? I know he is the city manager, and he's also running again. Are you in support of Mr. Canigallo? And if you are not, do you support any of the candidates? Do you want to come forward and say who you do support, who you don't support for city manager?
As city solicitor, no. The city solicitor has to work effectively, has to try to work effectively with all the elected officials of the city. I don't think that my opinion, one way or the other, should sway any voter. And the voter's opinion is all that really matters at the end of the day. The city manager that they give me, the city council that they give me to work with, I will work with.
So you don't want to tell the public who's listening who you would support for city manager at this point?
I think I've answered it. As city solicitor, I'm awaiting the will of the people there. That's my job. My job is to work with the city manager, the city councilors that they want me to work with.
Okay, since can't nail you down on that, let's talk about some of the hot button issues that are in the city right now. And it seems like the hottest issue that's going on in coffee shops and so forth is the issue with the traffic cameras. Where do you sit with your position on the traffic camera issue?
The traffic camera enforcement program is a policy decision. It was made by council. They went through the process of examining the potentiality of the program. The committees held a number of meetings on it. I was directed to prepare legislation. I researched and prepared that legislation. It was passed by a very substantial margin in council. It is currently the law of the city. It is a matter of policy, however. If what you're driving at, David, is how do I come down on, or how do I feel about the current referendum on the issue? When Steve Magda took over the petition drive on that issue, because the first go-around they had not garnered sufficient signatures to put it on the ballot, he called me and told me that he was going to be taking it over and that they were going to be circulating petitions, and he wanted to introduce himself to me. We discussed briefly the timing requirements. I gave him a breakdown of what the timing requirements would be, because those petitions had to be at the Board of Elections 60 days before November 8th. And Mr. Magda obviously was successful, but the Friday before that deadline expired, I believe the deadline expired on a Wednesday or Thursday, the Friday before, he called me again at my office and said that they would be doing one more push to get sufficient signatures, and they expected to file the petitions with the clerk of council, that's step one, on Monday. My response was to contact the clerk of council and the president of council and acquaint them with that information, and to recommend that City Council go ahead and schedule a special meeting immediately, because City Council needs to give 24 hours notice to its members before it can hold a lawful meeting. They did so, and Mr. Magda's group came through with sufficient signatures. They were able to be reviewed by the Board of Elections and submitted to Council at its special meeting. Council was able to vote in time to place that measure on the November ballot. The moral of that story is my feelings about the traffic camera program played no part in how I did my job. And that is what I'm referring to when I talk about being a professional solicitor. My personal outlook should not affect the right of the people to get an issue on the ballot if they want to get it on the ballot. So I worked to protect that right. And again, my feelings, my views are completely irrelevant to that.
It seems like that there's either black and white with this issue. Either you're for the cameras or you're against the cameras. You don't want to state your personal feeling. I can appreciate your professional response to it, but do you, as Mike Franklin, feel that the cameras are justified or not?
I think I've tried to answer your question as best I can. My agenda as city solicitor is to not permit a personal agenda. As soon as the city solicitor announces he's for or against a policy matter, the city solicitor stops being the dispassionate, the professional advisor to the policymakers that he needs to be. The city charter is very clear. It says the city solicitor shall be the attorney for the municipality and the legal advisor to its officials. It says legal advisor. It doesn't say that I'm free to give them advice on anything other than the law says this. The law gives you those options. That is my job. It is up to the policymakers to take into account the feelings, the wishes, the opinions of the citizens. The great thing about a referendum issue is that now the voters get to be the policymakers. They're the ones who are charged with gathering all the information and coming up with the best decision for their community. I'm confident they can do it, and they don't need my opinion to help them do it.
All right, well, let's move on to another issue. Your opponent has been bringing up an issue regarding a sewer agreement that the Office of Solicitor was involved in with Ashtabula Township. And one of the things that keeps being brought up is the issue of annexation. And annexation has been a hot button topic for several years regarding Wade Avenue and so forth. What is your position on being able to annex? Why weren't you trying to push for annexation when you were looking at the sewer agreement, as your opponent is suggesting?
Again, city solicitor, not the policymaker. City council, city manager, you're looking at the policymakers. I was one member of the negotiating team that worked on the revised sewer agreement with, actually it was the Ashtabula County Commissioners that we were negotiating directly with Saybrook Township trustees sitting in the corner of the room. And we had a team composed of the city manager, various members of city council sat in from time to time. The city auditor was there, and I was there. And across the table from us were a commissioner, the county prosecutor, a special counsel they had hired, and a few other people. Now, this might be kind of a long story, but to put this in context, the city and the county had first entered into a sewer agreement some 37 years before I took office. That city-county sewer agreement obligated the city to accept sewage from the county in lines to be built and maintained by the county in our treatment plant. And it said we, the city, could not require annexation as a condition of allowing people to tap into that system. What we did get, or what was negotiated at that time 37 years ago, was a very large capital contribution from the county. The county paid some millions of dollars for enhancement and repairs to the city wastewater treatment plant. Since that came into being, the city and county users of the sewer have paid the same bill to the city. The city collects its usage fees and it collects fees for capital improvement. So for 37 years, both the citizens of the city of Ashtabula and the citizens of the served townships have been paying into not only the treatment of their waste, but the capital improvement of the plant that treats the waste. When the city council announced the year before I came into office that there was no sewer agreement and that they would thereafter determine the terms and conditions upon which they would treat waste for the township after that, a lawsuit was filed. Now, I walked into office. My predecessor and I had about a 1-hour meeting to bring me up to speed on what was going on. And I was not specifically told that the city at that point was in default of answer in that lawsuit, that our time for answer had long since expired, and we were subject to having a default judgment taken against us. I discovered that and very quickly put together some responsive pleadings and answered the complaint of the county. What the county was seeking was a finding by the court that we had a perpetual sewer agreement between the city and the county. And out of that lawsuit arose the negotiations to which I've referred. So you've got a complex series of facts leading into a complicated series of negotiations. And the position initially taken by the city was that under the Supreme Court case called the Perrysburg case, if there's no city-county sewer agreement, the city can require annexation as a condition of treating sewage. The county's response was Perrysburg doesn't apply for a couple of reasons. One, we've had an agreement for 37 years, and the city, haven't given the county sufficient notice to terminate it. Secondly, Perrysburg was a dozen houses on a street that had never contributed to the capital improvements of the wastewater treatment plant that treated their waste, and there was a fairly lengthy portion of the decision that talked about how unfair that was to the city that had built the plant and maintained the plant, that they couldn't require annexation. Well, the county had an argument that they had bought a piece of the plant with their big capital contribution back 37 years ago, and that their people had been paying for maintenance and improvement of that plant ever since, and that they owned a piece of it, and therefore they were not subject to the Perrysburg decision. Whether you accept those arguments or not, and legally I did not, they nonetheless did have a situation that was different from Perrysburg, and if we held our ground and went to trial and went up on appeal, we might now in 2011 have a date for arguments before the Ohio Supreme Court. We would have no agreement. We would have no moving forward. We would have no nothing. So the decision was made in the negotiations, and again, it's a policy decision, to strike a compromise. And the compromise was joint economic development districts. The people who are already tied into the sanitary sewer system can continue to be. Commercial and industrial users, however, can be asked to join joint economic development districts with the city. And since those are agreements and people have to agree, have to actually want something in order for an agreement to take place, they can say no. But then they get a different treatment rate. They get to pay twice as much as everyone else for the treatment of their waste. As to new commercial and industrial developments, they don't get a choice. If they want to tap into a county line, step one is to sit down with the city and with their township trustees and negotiate a JED. So the sewer agreement attempted to both address the objections and concerns of the county residents who for almost 4 decades have been our partners in this system we have here, in this regional treatment system, and to give the city of Ashtabula a place at the economic development table that it had not had for 37 years. The policymakers at the table came to the conclusion that this was the best compromise. They gave it a limited time period. It's a 25-year agreement. It's not going to go on forever and ever. If it doesn't work in the next 25 years, there is always the annexation issue can come back up. But the feeling was, and the discussions seemed to indicate, that this was a very reasonable compromise that had every potential for significant economic development advantages, not only for the city, but for the township and the county. So that's how that came to be where it is.
You mentioned a little bit about the business community, and one of the positive things, in my opinion, has been the resurgence of Bridge Street, and it's been well documented how Bridge Street has bounced back and they're reinventing themselves, and they're doing very well down there. With everything that's been happening in a positive light on Bridge Street, what is your opinion on how this may affect or diminish Ashtabula, given what's occurred down there? Do you have an opinion on this?
My view is that the city of Ashtabula is no more nor less dangerous than any other place in the county. I would doubt that our murder rate or our violent crime rate is way out of sync with any similar sized community. In my view, as a member of the team that prosecutes crime, we need to have adequate resources to do so. And it is my strong hope that the new city council will take a very close look at the resources that have been designated for law enforcement and for prosecution and for the courts, and will make the tough policy decisions that will result in sufficient resources being there to do the job maybe a bit better than it is being done now. Not because anyone doesn't want to do the job well, but because we need things like jail space, we need officers on the street. Again, policy decisions. I understand that we also need those streets plowed. We also need those streets paved. But those sorts of policy decisions, they're tough ones. In my opinion, as part of the prosecution crew and part of the law enforcement crew, is that our part needs adequate resources. In terms of the fact that this murder occurred on Bridge Street in the middle of our burgeoning tourist community, a tourist attracting community, I'll put it that way, I can't really take that into account. Murder is murder wherever it's committed. And there's no place in the city of Ashtabula where I want to see people killed or hurt. It doesn't matter to me where it is in the city, and it really doesn't matter who the victim is. No one has the right to take another person's life except in those very limited circumstances that the law describes about self-defense. So I have to take the position that murder is murder and it needs to be prosecuted, whether it occurs on Bridge Street, whether it occurs on Main Street, or whether it occurs anywhere in between.
Well, now that the election season is upon us, and in about a month, we're about a month away from the actual election, what is it that you want voters to take away from your statements today? What is it you want to get across to the voters? Tell them what it is you want to do with the office should you be reelected.
I want to continue to take very literally the command that is found in the charter that I be the attorney for the municipality. The municipality, as I conceive it, is more than just the building in which you find City Hall. The municipality is the people of this community. The municipality is elected officials. It is department heads. It is rank and file employees, but it is also the citizens, the voters, the taxpayers. And I take very seriously the command that I be their attorney. Now, obviously, I can't represent every citizen of the city of Ashtabula in every legal matter that may arise, but I can keep in mind that that citizen is my client. And I can keep in mind that my agenda needs to be not to impose my agenda. My agenda needs to be to listen to the policymakers that those citizens elect or the decisions that they give us through the referendum process, and to do my best to bring those decisions into execution.
All right. Well, I do appreciate you taking the time to come here and let me ask you a few questions so that the public can understand what your position is for the office. And once again, this is Michael Franklin, candidate for Ashtabula City Solicitor and current office holder of Solicitor. So I do thank you for your time and appreciate you coming by.
Thank you for having me. I very much appreciate the opportunity.
All right, so this is this special episode of the Ashtabula County Insider. This is David Bucci, and we'll catch you again next time.